Hello, folks. Welcome on in. We'll give folks just a minute to settle in and come in from the waiting room. Welcome to How to Get Published in Non-Traditional Outlets, the third and final webinar in this three-part series on public history publishing, hosted by NCPH's Professional Development Committee. My name is Megan Hillman. I'm the program manager at NCPH, and I'm based in Indianapolis, Indiana. I encourage you all to please introduce yourselves in the chat. So this event does have Zoom auto captions available. To access those, you'll hit Show Captions on the bottom of your Zoom toolbar. If you don't see that option, you can hit More, the little three dots, and then you should see Show Captions. As a reminder, by joining us today, you did agree to adhere to our event's code of conduct. Please do stick to that code of conduct through the event. If you'd like to ask a question, you can drop a question in the chat. You can also use the Zoom Q&A tab at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar. And now I'm really happy to introduce Dr. Caitlyn Jones, a member of NCPH's Professional Development Committee. Caitlyn is a fellow in the American Conservation Experience's Mellon Humanities Postdoctoral Fellowship Program. She works in the fields of women's history, political history, and memory studies. And she received both her PhD in history and her MA in public history at the University of Houston. Caitlyn, please take it away.
Thanks so much, Megan, and thanks everybody for joining us this evening for our final panel in our publishing series, publishing in non-traditional outlets. And it's funny that we call them non-traditional outlets because many of these outlets have been around for so long. We've got a good group of folks here with us who publish in local newspapers, national outlets, blogs, podcasts, the whole gamut of public-facing media. And we're really excited to hear from them today. I am currently based in Houston, Texas, so if you hear a train in the background, it is train time in Houston, so I apologize for that. But I'll go ahead and introduce all of our panelists, and then we will hear from them individually. So first we have Dr. Stacie Taranto. She is an associate professor at Ramapo College of New Jersey, where she has taught courses on post-1945 U.S. political and women's history since 2010. Taranto holds an AB in history from Duke University and an AM and PhD in history from Brown University. She is co-editor of Suffrage at 100, Women in American Politics since 1920 with Johns Hopkins Press. She's also the author of Kitchen Table Politics, Conservative Women and Family Values in New York with the University of Pennsylvania Press. Taranto is the author of several scholarly articles, and her writing and commentary have also appeared in popular publications such as Time, The Atlantic, and The Washington Post. And she is currently the associate editor of Made by History at the Philadelphia Inquirer, and it was formerly at Time and then The Washington Post before that. Next up, we have Cornelia Lambert. She is a historian of science and medicine living in the greater Atlanta area. She thinks a lot and writes occasionally about childhood, education, families, and the ways that the human sciences affect them. She's been acquisitions editor at Nursing Clio for almost a year, but has admired the publication's willingness to deeply engage with important topics since its inception in 2012. And then last but certainly not least, we have Hayley Noble. She is a public historian and the executive director of the Lotta County Historical Society located in Moscow, Idaho. She previously worked at the Old Idaho Penitentiary Historic Site in Boise, and she earned her MA in Public History from Boise State University in 2019, and she served on NCPH's new professional and student committee from 2021 to 2023. She is currently the board president of the Idaho Association of Museums and holds positions in a myriad of other organizations. So we have quite the lineup for you here today. So we will go ahead and start off with Stacie.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Caitlin, and thank you, everyone, for having me here tonight. And hello to the audience. I can't see you, but I look forward to any questions later on. I do, yes, I have some slides, and Caitlin is kind enough, Dr. Jones is kind enough to to move them forward for me. My work computer is not that friendly to Zoom. So I'm going to talk for just about 10 minutes about Made by History, and I hope there are folks on the webinar who are excited to write for us. So I'll keep it pretty specific to what we're looking for because we're always looking for new authors. And Made by History was started in 2017. Hopefully, maybe some of you have heard it, read our work. And we were originally at the Washington Post. You can see our graphic there. We then moved to Time Magazine a few years ago. And then just last month, we found our new home right in time for the America 250, right in Philadelphia, which is an appropriate place to be as we celebrate 250. I actually got started as a writer at Made by History. And for those who don't know the history of the publication, it's now been 9 years. It was started in 2017. And you have to think back, you remember that was the first Trump administration, right, as he was coming into office. And something, oh, you might hear my dog barking. Sorry about that. A common refrain you would hear would be everything is unprecedented. You know, what Trump is doing is very different than in the past. And to be sure, a lot of it was, but Made by History was started to sort of to give people context that they might not be familiar with to contextualize a lot of these things. So, like, for example, the so-called Muslim ban that Trump was trying to put into place in his first term, that specifically had never happened, but folks could read on the pages of the Washington Post then and learn about things like the Chinese Exclusion Act and Johnson Reed in 1924 and other targeted forms of immigration restriction. So that was sort of the idea, to help people make sense of everyday events around them and to see them connected to different strands in history. So I'll go to my second and final slide, if that's okay now. Thank you. And I should say I started writing in 2017 and looking a lot. That was a time in which there was a lot of discussion between folks who were with Trump were called conservative, and folks who weren't with Trump in that first administration were called moderate. And I actually work on sort of like that split in the 1970s where you had true moderate Republicans versus conservative Republicans. So that was one of my first pieces talking about, oh, hey, what's the history of that kind of infighting in the Republican Party? And I eventually became an editor in 2021, just in time for Dobbs, because I do a lot of abortion work too. So that was the following year. Okay, so at Made by History, again, we welcome historians or folks who are other scholars to write now in the pages of the Philadelphia Inquirer. And again, that's our goal, to try to help everyday folks who might not know terms like historiography or might not have a sense of the broad sweep of American history, to help them make sense of specific events. So, what we encourage when we get a pitch is we encourage all of these things in maybe like a paragraph long. And then ultimately, when you write an article around 1,200 words, it would encapsulate a lot of these things. And if you're used to academic writing, it's a lot different than academic writing in some ways. But what I love about Made by History is we're all historians, and you can be having the conversations you might have in the pages of a journal, but we just help you shape that into a form that anyone with an interest to learn and or an interest in history specifically would be able to understand. In other words, they don't need to walk through the footnotes and a long historiographic, discussion about the various debates about your topic, but they do need some context. So typically, what we think is successful in our section, but I think this would apply really broadly if you're trying to be published anywhere using your historical knowledge, is starting with a lead, and that's a journalism term. I had to learn all these terms as a historian, and that's just your link to the news today. So this is happening right now at this moment in 2026. And it's not the first time that's happened, or it calls to mind this very similar incident. It doesn't have to be a one for one. I encourage you to go to just Google to search up Made by History, Philadelphia Inquirer, and you can see some of the things that are on our page right now, stuff that's been newsworthy perhaps in the past week, but it doesn't always have to be so timely. It can also just be in general. We call those evergreen pieces. Just something that's sort of been in the news in general. The war with Iran did not just start this week, but it's in the news in general, or in general, maybe looking at the government making all these plans for America 250, giving out no bid contracts. Maybe that calls to mind something like Boss Tweed in New York City, right? So it doesn't have to be like it happened this moment, but just something generally in the news. Then what they call a nut graph, or like in a nutshell, what you're going to be arguing about this current thing based on the historical context you're providing. That's kind of like in history, your thesis or your statement. And you just really want to signpost, make it really clear to folks. And then this is something that I don't think a lot of as historians, we like to write thematically, and it can definitely make sense if your piece is like undergirded with theory, or you're speaking to a specific audience. But when you're writing for the public and you're offering a backstory, this might sound obvious, but a lot of historians were not trained to do this. Do it right in a chronological narrative. Like people don't have, sometimes to the next point, like we're too expert. We naturally assume people would make the leap from point A to point B, but they might not because they haven't spent, years studying that topic like you may have. So again, really give that backstory chronologically, fill in the context, don't just throw out, something like in my work, the battle over the ERA. Like, no, you have to back up a little bit and say, the ultimately failed battle to add an equal rights amendment to the U.S. Constitution, something like that. Just a little bit of that explanation. We got a lot of footnoting in both our first drafts and even in sometimes the initial piece when you reach out to Made by History. We hyperlink in journalism, not footnote. And then at the end, circle back, make sure to make it very clear, reiterate your main point and connecting it to today. So I think like I'm sort of approaching 10 minutes, but I do just want to say on that first slide, we have a general, and you can see it on the front page of Made by History on the Philadelphia Inquirer's first page. We have a general email address. You can send something, but the various editors, and I include myself in this camp, you can always feel free to reach out to us directly. I mean, that's certainly true for me. I'm giving you my work email address, and really just a paragraph with essentially what I wrote there. But just, this is going on today generally, or it just happened. Here's the backstory I want to tell. And this is specifically the lesson from that backstory that helps us make sense today. Because, you always hear the old cliche, if we don't understand history, we're going to repeat it. It's not really like that kind of thing. It's more that I think a lot of historians, we walk through the world and we don't just see what's happening in our heads. We're giving the backstory. We're connected. We're like, oh, look what's happening. That makes sense because X, Y, and Z happened 20 years ago. So it's sort of just articulating that. And we would welcome anyone to write for us and to use our pieces in class. Thank you for technical help.
Thank you so much, Stacie. We'll go ahead and move to Cornelia now, and we will hear a little bit more about nursing Clio and writing for online blogs.
All right, my screen should show up in just a second here. There we go. Caitlyn, good. Thumbs up. Hi, I'm Cornelia Lambert. I am acquisitions editor at Nursing Clio, where we say the personal is historical. So I want to tell a little bit today about who we are and what we what we're about. Sorry, I had to wait for my slide. What we're about, that's a large part of what I'm going to talk about today because that will inform the next steps. I'm going to give a little bit of a peek into our process, even some behind the scenes view. So you might be curious about some of what we editors do behind the scenes, and then a little bit about why you should write for us. For those who don't know, the name Nursing Clio is a little foreign, and so I want to start with that and remind us all, if you haven't thought about it in a while, that Clio is the muse of history. And for the students who started Nursing Clio as a blog in graduate school in 2012, they wanted to honor the muse of history, but also with a nod to their studies in the history of medicine. And so they chose this kind of strange double entendre of an image of Nursing Clio, nursing being about caring or nourishment, not just nursing in the medical sense, but also in the sense of nourishment of an infant. So this is how the strange name came about, but it became a juggernaut in a sense. Something that started in a graduate program has become its own thing, and that is Nursing Clio. Nursing Clio is made up of volunteers. So this is not in any sense school affiliated or professionally affiliated piece in and of itself, but is a group of people who volunteer their time because they care about this outlet. Right now, our editor-in-chief is Sarah Handley-Cousins, and our managing editor is Kristen Brigg Ortiz. They are both pictured among the many, but we like to think of ourselves as a collective, and we don't often single ourselves out. So you might be thinking, okay, so there's something here about women and gender history. There's something here about medical history. Is that all we do at Nursing Clio? And the answer is no, because over time, but even from the very beginning, Nursing Clio was interested in a wide variety of things, the way we as historians are usually interested in a wide variety of things. And so what began with these two linked topics has grown to include the history of nursing itself, past and present, anything about health and the body, public health, especially during COVID, academic life, because it affects many of the people who write for Nursing Clio, although you don't have to be affiliated academically to be involved. Current events and pop culture always come up in Nursing Clio with people talking about what's on TV, what they're watching, what they're making of it, especially from a historical point of view or historian's point of view. And I even just include question mark because we are not limiting ourselves at Nursing Clio. If you can make some kind of argument that it would be interesting to our readers and connects in some way to our generalized themes, construed very widely, we will consider your piece. Another way to look at Nursing Clio is to say, well, what genre of writing do you accept? These are not academic papers per se, but tend to be essays in the 500 to 1500 word size. Obviously, topical essays, but also interviews, book reviews, personal essays, and reflections on current events or pop culture, and then my favorite, the calls to action. So just to give you a look at that very quickly, I have four that I chose somewhat randomly, but I also chose things that I really like. This first piece we might call a topical essay. This is Aparna Nair's The Joy of My Life, Seeing Eye Dogs, Disabled Veterans and Civilians in World War I. Now, on the surface, you might think, what does this have to do with gender history or even medical history? But Nair is a historian of disability, which is kind of under the wider umbrella of medical history. And in this piece, she talks about disabled veterans who are largely male, and she is able to weave in some insights about masculinity from her study of Seeing Eye Dogs. And so this has been a popular piece, but also a really enjoyable one. And so I thought this was a good example of the topical essay. Personal essay, somebody who had a personal or familial experience with Dr. Fauci wrote a really interesting piece for us called Dr. Fauci and My Mom in 2020 when his professional reputation was at stake. That, in a way, is almost a call to action, but this one is a personal style essay. I picked this one because this was a reflection on current events in 2020, the cruise ship as disease heterotopia. But as I'm sure Stacie finds as well in Made for History, sometimes what's topical one year will be topical 5 years later. And this could have been written in the past couple weeks with the hantavirus outbreak on the cruise ship. But this is the kind of thing we love. If you happen to know about the deeper history, the longer history of something that's in the news, and maybe you don't feel that this is right for Made for History, you can consider us as well. The cruise ship showing up here. Finally, a very recent essay, a friend of the blog, Jess Dillard Wright, wrote to us in the aftermath of the murder of Alex Preddy and told us that she really wanted to write something for us, and we worked with her. And she published what I can only call a call to action to people in the nursing field. And again, we don't just write about nursing. That is one misunderstanding about us because of the name. But we do often write about nursing because we have many friends of the blog who are nurses and nurse historians. And she had something she really wanted to say in the wake of that event. And so this was about current events, but it was also somewhat a call to action. So our process begins, as does Stacie's, with a pitch. And I always imagine somebody throwing something at us. And the thing about Nursing Clio is that we really want to catch it. We are not limited, maybe in quite the some way in the way that some outlets are. We can take as much as we can edit, right? And so we willing and ready to receive that pitch. If you go to the Nursing Clio website, nursingclio.org, there's a Write for Us tab. And if you hover over it, you can see particular calls for particular kinds of pieces we have, but also the link to pitch for us, meaning sending us some kind of idea about what you want to write. Now, we also give you some outlines on that page about what constitutes a good pitch, a link to the AHA suggestions. But largely, we're looking for three things, not too much different from what Stacie just talked about. You need to introduce the topic. You need to tell us the reason why this story is worth publishing now. Now, that doesn't mean it has to be connected to current events, but it does often mean that you need to place it in the history of now to some extent, because you might say, I've been studying this for years and I've just had this new insight. Or other people have studied something for years and I just now have this new insight. It might be that your personal perspective towards something has changed, and that is your in to there being a good reason for you to write about it. And then third, why Nursing Clio? That's why I spent so much time explaining the wide variety of things that we publish, because I don't want you to see the name or read the description, excuse me, and limit yourself. Pitch us. We'll tell you if it's not going to a good match for us. But like I said, we very widely construe what we consider to be our purview, and so we would love to see that pitch. So this is just for fun. Behind the scenes view, this is what happens, and some other people here might be familiar with this. It ends up on our Trello board, which means a whole bunch of work processes. I'll zoom in to show you a little bit of behind the scenes. Upcoming, I get the first card on Trello. The things that I say are coming down the pike are going to come down the pike, and that they are going to kind of move from left to right through these buckets. And actually, the first bucket is first editor, and then the second was second editor. And I'll talk about this more in Q&A if you need to know, but we have each piece go before two editors, even book reviews. Sometimes professionals especially think, well, I'm an adult, I know how to write a book review, but we even send those through the editorial process because we are looking for kind of a consistency in what we publish, and we want to make sure that each piece comes to that level of consistency. But then, the process here can repeat several times until everybody's satisfied. This is especially good because we do encourage and honor publications or pitches from undergraduates and graduate students. And so sometimes there's the expectation that a piece will go through two or maybe even three rounds of editing. And this is a gift, and I'll explain that why a little bit more. Finally, at some point, there's a final check and copy editing, and then the piece is scheduled for publication. This process can take about a month, typically, unless you're in a particular series we have called emergency response, in which case we try to get something out very quickly because it concerns current events that are of the moment. So the final thing, why you should write for us. There are so many reasons that you should write for Nursing Clio that I picked three, and I'm not even sure if I'm satisfied with these, but I'll stick with the ones I have on this slide. One is we are friendly people. Like I said, we are not here to send your pitch back at you and say this isn't good enough. We are interested in working with you to make it good enough if it's lacking at all, and it might not be. But we are friendly editors. This is also a place to get free feedback on developing ideas. When I think back to my graduate school years and even my early career years, especially if I wanted to move in a little bit of a new direction, it would have been great to have a place to get some feedback. Maybe not from the committee, right? Or maybe, as I was starting out as a young scholar, to get some feedback from some people who had some, professional bona fides, but who could give me some honest feedback on what I was saying or how I was saying it. Now, another good thing, and I've already mentioned that we do love pitches from undergrads and from new graduate students, is that the editing can be heavy if it's needed, meaning we're not going to give up on you. We're not going to start working on something with you and then say, well, you didn't fix it all the first time, so forget about it, kid. We're not like that at all. We're very interested in bringing things to fruition. And I'm not saying we never abandon pieces, but usually there are complications on some side that bring that to pass. We're happy to work with people. And I know that the piece that I have published with Nursing Clio was only made better by working with Vicki Daniel, who was the editor at the time, because she thought of things that I hadn't thought of. And so the name of the game really with us is collaboration. Finally, I wanted to say that you can form an actual relationship with us. You could even become one of us. We have a writers in residence program, and we hire several people per year to be writers in residence. And there's a flat stipend that's based on the number of pieces you commit to write for us. So especially if you're someone who is constantly thinking of, oh, I would love to complicate this. I would love to sit down and write a piece and have this, seen by other people and shared with other people because I've got these ideas, especially if you want to get your feet wet writing for the public and you are interested in trying it out somewhere. We're a great place to try out. Write for us some, and then apply to be a writer in residence, and then establish a relationship with us. We would love it. We would love your pitches, and we would love your participation. So that is Nursing Clio, where the personal is historical. And I've included not just, the website for general inquiries, and there are several emails available there, but also my own personal email. If you're curious about anything and just want more information, don't hesitate to reach out at nursingclioacquisitions@gmail.com. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cornelia. And we are moving on to our final panelist, Hayley Noble, who has done almost any type of public facing, writing, producing, all of that. So take it away, Hayley.
Thank you. Let's see. All right. Everyone can see the screen okay? All right. Well, yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about being on the other end of this process as a historian, trying to figure out where should I reach out to? What are the things that I can do to, pad your resume or whatever it is? And the biggest thing that I think I'm going to say to start with is to think local. That's one of my favorite places because you can get into really deep, niche, nuanced topics very easily. And so right now in my job, I am at a local historical society, and we have a wonderful relationship with several outlets here. We do newspaper columns about once a month, and we are fortunate that there are other area historical societies, and we're within 10 miles of 2 universities. And so we've got this wonderful kind of schedule where once a month, each of our organizations puts out a column. And that's something, that I think is low-hanging fruit. It's easy. It's a way to get your name out there in your local community. We also have a magazine called Home and Harvest Magazine that's published every other month. And so for every single issue, we have a story in there. And usually we do get a little bit of money for the organization for writing these stories because it is heavy on advertising, but that's a wonderful way to kind of practice. Just again, local stories, things that, people within a small town might be interested in. That's something to note too. We are a small town in Moscow, but we also have really wonderful communities that want to know this kind of stuff. Our historical society also publishes an annual journal, which is called the Leitao Legacy. And, my suggestion is that I think a lot of organizations do something like this, and that if you are interested and you have something that is really local to research, I would suggest reaching out and seeing if, there are places that would be open to having things in their journal or the newsletter. Down at the bottom of my screen is the newsletter from the Idaho Military History Museum. I wrote just like, a small piece for their newsletter that they do a couple times a year on just a topic I was really into at the time, combat art. And it was low-hanging fruit, and these places, they really need content, and they really need people that are knowledgeable. I also want to plug that Arcadia Publishing is really a wonderful place, again, to do local history. 2 years ago, they reached out to us because they were interested in a entry in their past and present series. And so they came to us, which was fortunate. And so we did a Moscow publication that came out last year. And with Arcadia, they kind of have things down. They have a layout, they have a template, they have basically all the instructions you need really ready to go. And they are super willing to work with local organizations and local authors because, I'm sure everyone has seen their Images of America books everywhere. They have so many publications, and their regional representatives are really great to work with. So these are just a couple local examples. Many of my other examples have to do with either my previous position at the penitentiary or my work that I started in graduate school on World War II and Soviet women in combat on the Eastern Front. So it's usually one of those two topics that I have stuff for. There are so many blogs online, and I feel like those are some of, again, low-hanging fruit that they are constantly looking. I gotta just plug our NCPH History at Work series. I wrote for them in 2020. on a new exhibit that was at the penitentiary. And it was really a seamless process. You know, they do editing, you submit your ideas, you talk about what are some of the things that you're looking for, similar to the process that Cornelia and Stacie already talked about, that they need content, and so they want to work with you. And it's again, they really just want to make your writing better. Another outlet is Clio and the Contemporary. I did a couple pieces for them a few years ago. They're just another blog site that is, you know, about history and connecting it to current events and lots of different topics. They have tons of little niches that you can fall into. And the last one down there is kind of a little bit of a different thing. This is the Cat's Meow Quarterly. So it doesn't exist anymore, but when it did, the whole idea was that you would publish something from the perspective of your cat. So I was able to do just a short little piece. I did basically a review of the historical fiction book, The Huntress by Caitlyn. And it was from the perspective of my cat, Artemis, as she would review this book and connect it, again, to Soviet women during World War II. And then it was published on Twitter, and Caitlyn saw it, and that was really cool. I feel like Twitter was where I would find some of these things. Now, of course, you know, we don't do the Twitter thing, but I feel like LinkedIn is now kind of a new place, but it's hard without Twitter, because I know that was a big place where these opportunities were posted. But just a couple different things, you know, I feel like between Nursing Clio and Made by History, you've got things like JSTOR and some of these other platforms. There are lots of opportunities. And you can do things like the NCPH History at Work series, but then you also have organizations like that that do their own journals. Oh, there we go. You know, they have both kind of the blog, but then also the hard copy stuff. And so one of my advice pieces is to think about something like a book review, where it's easy, it's accessible, they need that, and they have instructions on how to do that within. I was able to do a book review for the Journal of Military History a couple years ago, and it was within my Women in World War II focus. And it was much easier than I anticipated. Again, they need content, they want to work with you. And so even though, you know, I don't have the big PhD, it still felt like it was accessible as a public historian and something that was approachable for me. Now, a bit of a different thing. I feel like promoting yourself is also part of this, and it can be really hard and awkward. And I don't know a ton of historians that feel comfortable doing it, but it's something that can help and can give you a little elevation when you want to pitch something. And there are platforms that can do this for you, like the Contingent magazine, that in 2021, they were looking for people to talk about, okay, how do you do history? What does that look like? And again, they were so easy to work with and talk about what is it that you do as a historian on a day-to-day basis. There's also things like NCPH on like LinkedIn or something, where they did their hashtag talk about humanities like a couple months ago. And so I did that on my LinkedIn and then tagged them, and then they reshared my post. And I got tons of followers after that. You know, not necessarily people that I knew personally, but people that maybe down the road they can help me foster some connections. And it was a really easy, simple thing to do that who knows if it'll have a payoff in the future, but it was kind of fun to just like see it grow, and I had no expectation of that. Another thing is I continue some of my work with Soviet women in World War II on a Substack newsletter, which again, this is free. It takes time and energy, which of course, a lot of us don't have much of that, but it's something that is, again, low barrier to entry. And with that newsletter, I continued to share this Soviet women on the Eastern Front topic through social media as well. So sharing the newsletter through the social media channels. And it's not a huge following, but it's a little bit, and that can still make a difference. And it still feels like I am sharing what's important to me, and I am able to connect what I'm passionate about to a larger audience. And I also think some of these outreach opportunities found me because my info was easy to find, that databases like Women Also Know History, if anybody's familiar with that, it's a tool that either journalists or whoever can search for female historians, because we know that on things like panels, women are often not as represented. And so they have these databases that you can put your info out there, and it's easier to share than if someone was just like, well, I don't know who's a female historian that can help me with this thing. You can find people, and that has emails and websites and things to connect to. I also just want to put out there that being part of an organization like NCPH or AASLH or a museum association, these places also are really happy to share opportunities in things like their newsletters that come out several times a month. They will sometimes put a call out for authors. So just being a part of those organizations can also help you. And I'm going to talk specifically about the What's Her Name podcast. I attended the NCPH conference in Salt Lake City, whenever that was, a couple of years ago. And Katie Nelson, who was one of the two hosts of that podcast, was at a panel. And I approached her about doing an episode on a Soviet woman during the war, and she was very, very approachable and nice about it. And it was something, it took a couple months because she's busy, but, you know, as I think Cornelia said, like, I think history, museum, and humanities people, like, all of them are really, really nice for the most part. And they want to help you. They want to be able to see you be successful. And so, you know, don't be afraid to approach people, and you never know what can come of that. And that's, you know, something like the World War II TV thing. I have no idea how they got my contact info, but it works. And I got to talk and be really nerdy on the YouTube channel. And so it's be willing to say yes to these opportunities. But I also just want to, you know, also say that, like, burnout is real, and don't have to feel like you have to take advantage of every single opportunity, because that can be really hard. And you'll notice that a lot of the stuff that I mentioned happened in the early 2020s. Now I'm a director at a nonprofit, and that takes a lot of my mental energy. And so it's just like, pace yourself, but also, you know, don't be afraid to put yourself out there. And unfortunately, a lot of the stuff that I mentioned is unpaid. And I already know that within the history field, we have a big gap in terms of unpaid labor. So, you know, just be mindful and take care of yourself, but don't be afraid to go for it. So that's what I got.
Thank you, Hayley. We do have some questions from the audience, and if you are in the audience and do have a question, remember you can pop it in the Q&A feature, or you can put it in the chat as well. But to kind of go off of what you left on about pay, and I know that Cornelia mentioned it too. Someone asks, can someone talk about whether any outlets pay for contributions, and maybe an experience as an editor, but also as a person who's writing these publications. Maybe we can tackle that.
I can start. I know I've written for many publications, and also one of my favorite book interviews was on nursing Clio. Cordelia's talk reminded me of that. I have never personally been paid, and I know, as Hayley just said, that can be difficult. And it's our expertise and unpaid labor. We do enough of that in other areas of our life. I will say that, especially as a writer at Made by History, well, we just don't have the funds to pay authors, especially when we're publishing a lot every month. Um, it has led to other opportunities. So I know that when I initially started writing pieces for that, I would start, it's this sort of what Hayley was talking about, that network out there. I would start to get invited to different forums, different historical societies, especially as Zoom became more of a thing. And a lot of those will pay an honorarium. So it's not that I've directly been paid for it. And of course, you can't guarantee it, but sometimes there's the silver lining of even just networking opportunities, putting you in touch with other historians. Our team is a team of 6 historians. That those networking possibilities for conferences and things like that, there can be other benefits, and sometimes it can lead to a paid talk, but I've never been paid.
Yeah, I would just add, say the same thing, that payment is few and far between. Uh, I think especially for nursing Clio pieces that are so short, uh, that they're tiny. They can be tiny, but we're helping you with exposure, and that's so important. And I mean, I think Hayley spoke to that, that it gets you out in front of people, and that's just really important.
I remember specifically when my nursing Clio interview was there that I actually did get invited to a talk, and I was able to sell books there. So yeah, that exposure that you just don't think of as a historian, right? Like we're not trained in that way. And yeah, so it can really lead to great things.
Another question that is from the audience, but I also had kind of goes to the process of, writing for a public facing outlet. So, in academia, we have peer review, and we know that that's a very long and arduous process that we all go through. But is there any sort of fact checking that goes into these types of publications? What is that like, and how long does that take? Or, maybe even Hayley too, working with these editors of like a local newspaper, like what is that process like?
I don't know if I could start. I actually, when Cornelia, I was so glad that you talked about your first editor, second editor process, because we have that same process at Made by History. We're a team of 6 historians. And again, we encourage anyone to pitch us as well. And we're getting actually, since we've moved and have a little bit of a focus on America 250, we're getting a lot more pitches from non-academics. And we really welcome it all if you're able to contextualize something in the news for us or in general. And we also do the first edit, the second edit, and it can be multiple rounds, but sometimes it's timely. Like when Dobbs happened, we wanted it, immediately. Sometimes when it's more of those evergreen processes, it could take a couple weeks from the okay to when you actually see it published. And then because we work with traditional news media outlets, they do their own kind of fact checking. Now, they're not going, the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Post, the Time Magazine, they're not going to be checking something on the history side, but especially when you're linking to things about today, especially a lot of those publications have been sued by the current government. Like they're definitely going to make sure that if you said the president said something, that we actually have proof that the president said something. So they'll do some of that more contemporary fact checking, and we'll do the historical process. I, as an editor, like to do a second read on a piece that I'm not expert in, because well, A, I learned things, but B, I can be that person to say, wait a minute, like you need more context here. Not everyone knows what the ERA is. Like we're not all studying that. So that kind of thing. So that's our process, both on the history and sort of the regular fact checking from the outlet.
So I can repeat a little bit of that for Nursing Clio that Kristen, our managing editor, does try to get at least one of those editors, one of the two, to be kind of familiar with the subject area or adjacent to it in some way, and somebody else who has completely no idea, because it gives that balance between what Stacie's talking about, and then also just the sense that, I'm reading this, but this doesn't sound right to me. But that happens very rarely. What has begun happening is AI use and pieces given to us, and so of course we had to rush together and decide what's our policy, how are we going to deal with this, and the main idea is we expect our pieces to be written by human beings, long and short of it. But we kind of we make sure the piece passes a sniff test, but we trust our scholars to be doing their job.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit just fact checking for us at like the local level with the newspaper or the magazine. I don't think they do any. The column is submitted on Wednesday and then it's printed on Saturday. So they really trust us to make sure that we are doing good work, good historical work. As far as some of the other things, I'm not sure. I trust, like the NCPH history at work, like I'm sure they did fact check that stuff. Some of the more public things I am confident that they fact check, but some of the other stuff I don't know. I would hazard maybe not. I'm not sure. And again, I think that comes down to like what is more of the professional done by historians platform versus something like our local magazine where they trust us to do our good work. So it really varies, I think.
Thank you all. Another question that's in the chat is, what are some of the most common issues you encounter when you're reviewing and editing contributions?
I guess I'll just take it upon myself to answer first and go down the line. I think it's just that people are too expert in their area. And especially sometimes it happens if you're not teaching. Sometimes if you're teaching it, you're a little bit, you're just conditioned in the classroom to give the wider view or to explain things more. But, if you're just really focused on a book and you're really deep in the research, you're just making those leaps that people who aren't expert aren't making. So I think that's generally the biggest, minor pitfall. And, again, this makes all of us better. It makes you better in all kinds of writing if you can just learn to give that context and to explain more fully. That's probably the most common one.
I'm still thinking, Hayley, you want to go?
I mean, we're not really publishing something except for our journal at the kind of end of the year. And that, we really, with that, it's much more, you need your sources. We have a bibliography, we do all of that. But yeah.
Is there something that maybe you as a public writer have an issue that you have overcome, I guess, or gotten better at?
I would second the background context. When I was working at the penitentiary, Idaho is a very interesting place. And some of that history, people don't always know elsewhere. So it was also just, again, providing that background info that maybe somebody that's not been in the West or is unfamiliar with Idaho, it might be a little over someone's head if they are on the East Coast or something. So I would second what Stacie said.
Now, I can't think of some, overwhelming pattern that I've seen except for misplaced modifiers. always the grammatical bugbear, constant.
I will say I'm guilty of that. So that's still a burden I need to overcome. One of the things that I think we've alluded to, but perhaps haven't addressed, is when we're doing public facing writing, who are these publics that we're trying to reach? And of course, that's varied based on all of your experiences, but how do we get them to care? What are some of the best ways to really engage with these publics? What are some of the best articles and stories that you've seen or written?
One thing is that, and we can see it in like the stats, it's to have a really, we try to do this in all forms of writing. You try to have your opening hook, but a lot of people in the click environment, like you really have to engage them right away. Whether that's with something that's so timely, or if it's more something that's, just in general in the news, like that cruise ship, right? Like things like that keep happening. Then you need a story, like you need to pull them in. And I know we do that in all kinds of writing, including academic writing, right? But because if not, people are off to the next thing they're clicking, right? They're just so conditioned. So I think that's something to keep in mind. That's the best stories like pull you in and you have to keep reading like through that 100-year history. So just keeping it relevant to them and engaging, letting them know why it matters to them. Because as it turns out, people like to read things that either validate themselves or seem relevant in their own lives.
I think I would add to that, one of the beauties of Nursing Clio is that it was born on the internet, and so it is made for the internet. And we use graphics and, other things to keep people hooked. We pay a lot of attention to that first paragraph, as we all have been taught to do. Hyperlinks, connecting it to previous stories, all of these things. Um, but another thing that I think kind of has occurred with Nursing Clio because of where it came from is that, the very graduate students who created this blog, have then gone on to have academic and sometimes outside of academic careers. But those of us who are in academia or have been, in my case, we have taken these stories to our students and assigned these to our students. And then we tell our students, well, you can keep up with, there's more reading coming down the pike from these people. So if you're interested in women's history or interested in medical history, keep an eye on this. And so we've hoped that, through undergraduates, we've kind of reeled people into the world of Nursing Clio. And I mean, well, one thing I was going to mention is that over the past couple of years, a select few readings from Nursing Clio have been collected into a reader that was published by Rutgers University Press. And so it's made it out into the physical world. And we hope to do that again in the next few years with a different topic. The topic of that reader was reproductive health and reproductive justice. But I guess what I'm saying is that as an academic, my public has always been the undergraduate student. And so Nursing Clio is partially aimed at that public, but it's also aimed at the clicking public, who's going to click on that link and get routed to us. And we hope that they stay for more.
Yeah, I guess I would just I differentiate. So between like the work that I do around World War II and gender, that is very much all online. And so it's people that are already maybe interested in World War II, but then being able to challenge some of those perspectives that we have. I love kind of poking the misogyny and being able to connect that as well to what's going on with Pete Hegseth and the military and demoting female officers and making those connections to show that the arguments that are being made are invalid because we have historical evidence. And then professionally, I guess in my role at the Historical Society, what we do that finds the most success plays really heavily on the nostalgia factor, which, I think that's the case with just about everything is right now. We're seeing a lot of things that we did with it as a community in the 70s. That's, it's people reminiscing, but then also maybe being able to throw in some critique or something that makes them think a little bit deeper. So it's not that 100% romanticized nostalgia, to talk about, yes, we'll talk about the bicentennial, but then let's also talk about, Nixon and the bitterness that was going on in the 70s at the same time. And we're not going to throw it out there and say things are similar now, but maybe the public can make those connections. And so, yeah, the nostalgia, I think, is really the big factor for us in terms of the things that we find successful, at least locally. And I'm sure that's the case just about everywhere.
Nostalgia really does sell, no matter where.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much. We are coming up on the hour. Thank you for sharing your knowledge, for answering questions. I so enjoyed learning from all of you, and I will toss it back to Megan to wrap us up here.
Hi. So I just want to thank everybody on behalf of NCPH, our speakers, and Caitlyn, and also our attendees today. I'm going to send a follow-up email this week with a link to this recording, and then also a sort of collection of the links that were shared in chat, which I hope you'll be able to reference. I'll probably go ahead and resend the whole run of 3, since this was a 3-part publishing series for y'all. So I just want to say thanks and have a very good evening.